every company says it's doing the right things and establishing the right change. So let me play devil's advocate. If I were to go work for the tobacco companies, I mean, they say they're producing reduced risk products like e-cigarettes, heated tobacco products, nicotine pouches. Is it okay if I go work for RJ Reynolds?
Okay, so what we're getting into here is the difference between ethics and morals when it comes to the profession. And and for me, there's kind of two issues. The ethical part of it is what you do for those companies. Yeah. So if you stick with, and it doesn't matter which professional code of conduct it is for which PR institute in which country, they nearly all will have something in there about telling the truth, behaving with integrity. So that's the first point. Whatever you do, you have to stick with those ethical codes of the profession. The second part is the morality, because that's actually personal. That isn't a set of rules, which is what kind of codes of conduct are. The morality is about what you personally are willing to do. Now, for me, a tobacco company would be a big red no. I just would not go near working for but that's a moral issue. It's not an ethical issue. And I just wouldn't do it. And for me personally, kind of the way that I look at it inside my head is, can this be used for good? Does it have a possible positive use? And I think the most dramatic example of that is probably the defense industry, because I've just used the word the defense industry. If
Mm.
I'd used the arms industry, it has totally different connotations. So I think but that's a personal judgment I would make, and I would respect any kind of PR person making that personal judgment as who they want to work for. But whatever judgment they make, they still have to do it in an ethical way.
I want to break that down a little bit. Let's first go at ethics. Help me codify what are the ethics I should be looking for in an organization or a movement before I choose to work with them? Because ethical considerations and ethical behavior are extremely important to me personally as part of my morality.
Okay, so if we were to look at, say, either the tobacco industry or fossil fuel companies, some of the ethical considerations, if it was a fossil fuel company that was wanting to deny climate change,
Right.
then that would be an ethical no, because we all know it's a scientific fact. Climate change is happening. Fossil fuel companies are contributing to it. So absolutely, you should, a public relations professional should not be part of that denial. Now, if it's a fossil fuel company that has views on how it should tackle that, and it say has a 10-year plan, but we think it should be a 5-year plan, as long as you are being honest and truthful and sticking to the facts, I mean that is where the ethical dimension comes in.
In some ways, better to be on the inside. There's an old saying about better to be on the inside pissing out than on the outside pissing in, right? You just have more
Absolutely.
sway.
I
Yeah.
thought you were going to use a polite version of that, but you've used the best version. I like
It's a
that.
podcast. If I can't go over the edge on a podcast, when can I? And then morality. I love the way you broke those ethics and morality apart there. Help me maybe talk through some of the things that impact your choices there, because that's what it comes down to for each of us individually. Does that fit me morally? And I don't always know how to make that decision all the time. It's
No,
great.
and I think most people don't, and it's a real challenge. And I think kind of over the years, I probably have boiled mine down into this. Can it be used for good?
Yes.
Now that's quite a kind of hazy concept, because you could have people. I've no doubt you could have people arguing, well, e-cigarettes are helping people to relax and
Right.
de-stress. I'm sorry, I'm not buying that, but that's just my personal opinion. It's my personal morality. I would be, I mean, one of the other controversial ones you get is if people are working for, say, foreign governments or other states, which maybe have different approaches to democracy or human rights to we're used to in the West. Now, is it right to work for them? And I think for me, it would be a judgment per country. The first thing I would do is look at what the kind of, in my case, the UK Foreign Office says. What is their stance? Because, they know a lot more about it than I do. So I need to know their position first. But then the second one would actually be thinking, okay, is this country genuinely trying to change? Or is it just kind of greenwashing or sports washing, which we kind of see nowadays? And it's trying to give the impression that it wants to. I think, one good example of that is kind of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It has an extremely controversial reputation. But I also happen to know from having spoken to people there in government and doing communications for them that there is a genuine desire to change. So things like, a big thing that the Saudi government wants to do is to get more Saudi women into the workforce. That raises lots of eyebrows with people in the West if they don't already know that. But that's something the Saudi government wants to do. Now, are they going as fast as I would like? Absolutely not. Have they done as much as I would like? Absolutely not. But the reason they haven't is there's also a kind of big spectrum of Saudi society that don't want them to do that. And if they attempted to push it through too quickly, it might actually mean it doesn't happen. And I think so. Everything is about kind of weighing up these things. Ultimately for me, it's about, am I making a positive contribution by doing this? Am I making a difference? Towards public good? And I think I think that's too often ignored in public relations, is the fact that actually part of what we are doing is meant to contribute towards society and public good.
But Stuart, what if it pays a lot of money? And let me deepen that a little bit. You and I are maybe a little longer in the tooth on, maybe playing the back nine on our careers. But there's a lot of young people, and a lot of young people listen to this podcast. And money is very, very meaningful. And for a lot of them, they've either started or are about to start a family. And an opportunity to make a lot of money. Morals, I don't want to say they get gray, but can't I stretch a little bit? And don't I owe it to my family morally to make money when I can?
Okay, I think this is one where we get interesting. And I was recently in Sofia at the Global Amex Summit, and they had a panel there. And I get really frustrated when people talk about millennials, Gen Z, Gen whatever, as if they should all be this amorphous mass.
Right.
And I think one of the interesting things was listening to the young people on stage, is that they clearly weren't an amorphous mass. So some would have said things like that. I need to pay my rent. It costs a fortune living in the city I live. Fair point. Others, no, I'm not going to compromise my kind of beliefs or to work for a fossil fuel company. And I think once again, it does come down to personal. And we've had practical examples in the PR industry. I mean, probably most notably, the one I can remember is Edelman, when they took on the account for, I think it was the US Border Force. And they pitched for it. It was hard work. They won it. But then they had to resign it because so many people in their team didn't want to work on that account.
Right. Listen to your employees.
Yeah, and I think it's a real challenge for companies that you're going to have a mix. I mean, on the tobacco example, going back to when I ran an agency, we actually had that real life example. We had just lost a big client. It had literally just kind of happened that week. And we were kind of sitting there scratching our heads, kind of thinking, can we keep everybody on? How long can we keep them on for?
Right.
Do we need to let somebody go? And at that point, a friend of mine, actually, ironically at Edelman, called to say that they'd just had an approach from a tobacco company looking for something very specific that he knew we were really good at, that they were really good at, but they don't work with tobacco. And my initial response was, well, we don't work with tobacco. But then I kind of thought, well, actually, I might be about to make people redundant. Am I really in a position to make that decision then sack people? So we actually talked about it as a team. And I put that to the team and said, look, if we take this on, if we don't take this on, some of you might have to go. Not a single person wanted to take that account.
Okay.
Even though they knew their jobs were on the line, because we didn't know at that point who it was going to be. So I think, yeah, it does come down to that kind of personal morality.
And what a tough decision for your staff, because at the time they're willing to take a stand, but you and I both know human psyche, because they think they'll be the exception and they won't be let go. That's right. They have that positive outlook.
Yeah,
To a different vein here, the UN Secretary General's comments ultimately are about someone in a very high and powerful position truly not understanding what we do for a living. And you and I can sit and criticize that because it's been talked about and talked about. The problem is, I can't explain to my mother, you can't explain to your mother what we do for a living. And the irony is, we make our living explaining things that are difficult in an easy to understand way. Stuart, are we just stupid?
No, I think the problem is public relations is such a broad spectrum.
Yeah.
So if you're a publicist on a movie and you're just doing that, then you're a public relations person.
Yeah.
That's entirely different to doing corporate affairs or internal comms for a fossil fuel company. And I think trying to encapsulate that in a kind of really snappy, kind of soundbite, elevator pitch way is incredibly hard. And if you do, it leaves people kind of gaping because it's like it's not very specific. It's
No.
yeah, but, you start. Well, it's about helping companies with their reputations and their relationships with the stakeholders.
Yeah.
There's hardly a word in that sentence that most people can understand. So you talk to journalists, you make videos, you run events. People can understand those
The
things.
tactical, yeah.
But the fact is, they're just the tools that we use. They're not why. What's really important is why do we use those tools? What are we trying to achieve? And that is incredibly hard to explain to people.
Amazing. And ultimately, we do good work. We do help nudge the world in a better direction. Give me some examples of how PR pros have successfully driven positive change in society.
Well, just before, we should do that. We should be kind of nudging the world in the right direction.
Yes, we should.
But I think that's one of the reasons why, we've sometimes kind of used the words public relations and communications interchangeably.
Right.
And I'm a big fan of using the term public relations. And the reason is, if we talk about communications, it implies you can communicate yourself out of it. Just by saying things, you're going to make a difference. When we both know it's by doing things, it's by changing behavior.
Yeah.
And I think, and that's the reason I always prefer the term public relations, even though if we actually go back to your point about its reputation, it's got the reason people don't use PR is because, that's just spin, that's just PR,
Right.
is the prerogative term that's used. In terms of answering the question about kind of give some examples, I think one of the kind of the challenges here is some of those best examples you don't actually know about. It's a bit like when you do crisis communications, and all of the best work I've done is the work I can never ever talk about because it's never become a crisis. Mm-hmm. You've been sitting advising your CEO who maybe wanted to do one thing, and you've advised a different course of action, so it never actually becomes a crisis. So I think that in terms of kind of saying what those examples are, it's really hard. The one that sticks in my mind is actually from I was really, really early on in my career, and I didn't know what PR was. I was still figuring it out. And there was a guy I was doing a professional qualification, and one of our lecturers was a kind of senior comms person at BT, British Telecom. And he was giving an example of something that he'd done in his job where his bosses had said, look, you've got to do something about our phone boxes. I'm certainly conscious that young people are listening to this and be saying, phone boxes? What's a phone box? But yeah, he said it would be because basically they had a really bad reputation because all the phone boxes, the windows were broken, people were, I can say pissing because you've said it.
Yes.
People were pissing in them. They were smelly. They were dirty. The handsets were ripped out. They were just vile. And he was told you've got to come. We've got a really lousy reputation for our phone boxes. You've got to fix it. To which Dennis's reply was, well, yeah, that's easy. We fix the phone boxes. If they weren't dirty, if they actually worked, if they were clean, if people could use them, then they wouldn't have a lousy reputation. And that's what they did. That's what they actually started to do. They put more investment into getting the phone boxes better, because he explained to them you weren't going to fix it by comms alone.
I guess that's like the sports team that is developing a bad reputation because it keeps losing. The answer is win some games.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, how are you going to win those games?
Yeah.
Do you need a new manager? Do you need to invest in new players? Have a shake up of your tactics.
Right. Brilliant. I really appreciate your time today, Stuart. We'll have to get together again.
No, this has been fantastic. We really, really enjoyed the chat.
If you'd like to send a message to my guest, Stuart Bruce, you can do that. We've got some contact information in the show notes. By all means, send me your thoughts on this episode. I know some may disagree and might think the UN Secretary General was spot on, and that's okay. On Spotify, there's a link where you can leave a comment. If you're listening on Buzzsprout, you can leave feedback directly there too. And any other podcast app, if you're listening, you can just send me a note personally at doug@storiesandstrategies.ca. Let me know if it's okay if I share your comment on a future episode. Stories and Strategies is a co-production of JGR Communications and Stories and Strategies podcast. If you like this episode, please leave a rating, possibly a review. Thank you. Thumbs up to our producer, Emily Page. And lastly, do us a favor, forward this episode to one friend. Thanks for listening. Stuart, awesome. Hang on, let me stop.